The auction block stood in the center of Fort Worth, Texas, baking under the merciless August sun of 1878, and Fiona Vaughn tried not to think about how she had fallen so far from the young woman who had left Boston with dreams of starting fresh in the West. The sweat trickled down her spine beneath the faded cotton dress that had once been blue, but now resembled the color of dust, and her throat burned with thirst she dared not voice. Around her, men gathered like vultures, their eyes calculating the worth of human flesh bound by contracts rather than chains, though the difference seemed negligible when your freedom hung in the balance. "Next lot," barked the auctioneer, a portly man whose mustache drooped in the heat. Miss Fiona Vaughn, age 22, literate, can cook and sew. 3 years remaining on her indenture contract to cover passage debts and additional expenses incurred during employment with the late Mrs. Henrietta Morrison. Starting bid at $200. Fiona kept her chin up despite the humiliation burning through her veins. She had come west 6 months ago to work as a companion to an elderly widow, only to find herself trapped when Mrs. Morrison died suddenly, leaving debts that somehow became Fiona's burden. The lawyer had been quick to explain how the contract worked, how she owed not just for her passage but for room and board, for the dresses Mrs. Morrison had purchased her, for medical care when she had fallen ill with fever. The numbers had multiplied like locusts until 3 years of her life belonged to whoever would pay. The bidding started slowly. A saloon owner offered $210, his leer making clear what sort of work he expected. A rancher countered with $225, looking her over like livestock. Fiona focused on a point beyond the crowd, trying to separate her mind from her body, from this moment that felt like a nightmare she could not wake from. $500. The voice cut through the murmuring crowd, deep and steady, belonging to a man who stood at the edge of the gathering. Fiona's gaze snapped to him involuntarily. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn Stetson. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, marked by a scar that ran along his left jawline, but his eyes caught her attention most. They were gray, the color of gathering storm clouds, and they looked at her not with calculation or hunger but something else she could not immediately identify. $500, the auctioneer repeated, clearly pleased. "Do I hear $550? The saloon owner shook his head and stepped back. The rancher glared at the stranger but said nothing. No one seemed inclined to challenge the bid. $500 going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Gideon Vance. Fiona felt her knees weaken but locked them straight. Gideon Vance. She turned the name over in her mind as the stranger approached the platform to handle the transaction. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, his boots leaving prints in the dusty earth. He wore typical cowboy attire, denim pants and a chambray shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scattered with old scars. A gun belt sat on his hips, the leather worn smooth with use. The auctioneer handed Gideon a stack of papers, the contract that now bound Fiona to this stranger's service. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he turned and walked toward her. This was the moment that would define the next 3 years of her life. Would he be cruel, kind, indifferent? She had heard stories of indentured servants treated worse than animals, worked to death, or abused in ways that made death seem preferable. Gideon stopped 2 feet away from her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the way they softened slightly as they met hers. He was perhaps 27 or 28, she estimated, with the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. Without a word, he held out the papers to her. Fiona stared at the contract, confused. Was he offering her a chance to read the terms? That seemed unlikely but preferable to the alternative. "Take it," he said quietly. His voice matched his appearance, rough around the edges but not unkind. She reached out slowly, expecting him to pull the papers back at the last moment in some cruel jest. But he simply released them into her hands. Fiona looked down at the document, at her name written in careful script, at the terms that spelled out her servitude. "You are free to choose," Gideon said, and the words made no sense at first. Fiona looked up sharply. "What? The contract is yours. You can tear it up right now if you want. You do not owe me anything. You do not owe anyone anything." He gestured to the papers in her hands. "You are free to choose what happens next." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Fiona gripped the contract so hard the paper crinkled. "I do not understand." "You just paid $500. "I did." "Why would you do that just to give me the contract?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving past her to the auction block where another unfortunate soul was being brought forward. When he looked back at Fiona, something hard had entered his expression. "Because I know what it is like to have no choices. Because no person should be sold, no matter what pretty words we dress it up in. Because I could do something about it today, so I did." Fiona's hands trembled. She looked down at the contract again, at the legal words that had felt like a noose around her neck. She could tear it up. She could walk away. But to where? She had no money, no prospects, no family in Texas. The same desperation that had led her to sign the original indenture contract still existed. Freedom without means was just another form of cage. "I have nowhere to go," she said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "That is your choice to make," Gideon replied. "But if you want a job, I could use help at my ranch. I would pay you fair wages, $20 a month plus room and board. You could leave any time you wanted. But you would be an employee, not a servant, not property." $20 a month was generous for women's work. Fiona studied Gideon's face, searching for the trap, the hidden cruelty, the real price she would have to pay. But his expression remained open, patient, as if he had all the time in the world for her to decide. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face, though it held more sadness than humor. "Maybe I am trying to balance the scales for past wrongs. Maybe I just hate seeing people in chains. Does the reason matter if the offer is genuine?" Fiona supposed it did not. She looked at the contract one more time, then deliberately tore it down the middle. The sound of ripping paper seemed impossibly loud. She tore it again and again until nothing remained but pieces too small to read, and let them fall from her fingers like snow. They drifted to the ground, settling in the dust, and something that had been coiled tight in her chest for months finally loosened. "I would like the job," she said, meeting Gideon's eyes. "As an employee." He nodded, and this time his smile reached his eyes. "Then we should get out of this town before you change your mind. I have supplies to pick up, then we can head to the ranch. It is about 2 hours' ride north of here." Fiona walked beside Gideon through the crowd, acutely aware of the stares following them. She held her head high, refusing to show the fear and relief warring inside her. He led her to a wagon hitched outside the general store, the bed already half full of supplies. A bay horse was tied to the back, its coat gleaming in the sunlight. "Wait here," Gideon said, then disappeared into the store. Fiona stood beside the wagon, still half convinced this was a dream or a trick. People did not simply buy indenture contracts and tear them up. People did not offer fair wages and freedom to strangers. And yet the pieces of paper still littering the auction ground said otherwise. Gideon emerged carrying a bundle which he handed to her. Fiona unfolded it to find a split riding skirt in dark canvas and a simple white blouse, both new and of decent quality. There was also a wide-brimmed hat and a canteen. "You will need those at the ranch," he said. "You can change at the boarding house down the street. I will wait." Fiona clutched the clothes to her chest. "You do not have to spend more money on me." "Consider it a uniform," Gideon replied easily. "Besides, that dress looks about ready to dissolve in the next strong wind. Meet me back here in 20 minutes. The boarding house keeper, a matronly woman with kind eyes, showed Fiona to a small room where she could change. Fiona stripped off the threadbare dress with relief, washing quickly with the basin of water provided before donning the new clothes. The fabric was sturdy but comfortable, and the fit was surprisingly good. She plaited her long auburn hair into a braid, tucked it under the hat, and studied herself in the cracked mirror. She looked different. Not like the frightened indentured servant from an hour ago, and not like the naive Boston girl from 6 months ago. Someone in between, someone still being formed. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. When she returned to the wagon, Gideon gave her an appraising look and nodded. "Better for ranch work. Can you ride?" "Not well," Fiona admitted. "I have been on a horse 3 times in my life." "Then you will ride in the wagon with me until we can teach you proper. Come on." He helped her up onto the bench seat with an efficiency that suggested he was not accustomed to having passengers, but was making an effort to be courteous. Fiona settled beside him, very aware of his presence, of the space between them on the bench. Gideon took up the reins and clicked his tongue, and the horses began to move. Fort Worth fell away behind them as they headed north, the town giving way to open prairie that stretched to the horizon in rolling waves of grass. The sky was impossibly blue and vast, dotted with white clouds that sailed like ships overhead. Fiona had not left the town since arriving, and the sheer space of it all made her feel small and free at the same time. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the jingle of harnesses, and the wind rushing through the grass. Fiona snuck glances at Gideon, trying to puzzle out the man who had upended her fate. His profile was strong, his attention on the trail ahead, occasionally scanning the horizon with the wariness of someone used to watching for danger. "Tell me about the ranch," Fiona said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. Gideon glanced at her and seemed to consider his words. "It is called the Vance Ranch, original as that is. About 2,000 acres, mostly cattle with some horses. I have a dozen hands who work the property, good men for the most part. The main house is nothing fancy, but it is solid. Built it myself 5 years ago. You have been here 5 years, closer to 6 now. Came to Texas after the war ended, spent some time drifting before I saved enough to buy the land." He paused. "There is a woman, Mrs. Chen, who does most of the cooking for the hands. She is getting on in years and could use help, especially with the garden and preserving food for winter. If that does not suit you, there is other work. Plenty of mending, some cleaning, helping with the horses during foaling season in the spring. Whatever you are willing to do." "I can do all of that," Fiona said quickly. "I am not afraid of hard work. Did not figure you were." Gideon shifted the reins to one hand and reached into his shirt pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. "Wrote this up before we left. Terms of employment. You should read it and tell me if you find anything objectionable." Fiona unfolded the paper and read the neat handwriting. It was a simple contract stating she would work for Gideon Vance at his ranch for $20 a month plus room, board, and necessary clothing. Either party could terminate the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice. It was dated and signed by Gideon, with a space left for her signature. "This is more than fair," Fiona said softly. "It is what is right. You need a pencil," she nodded, and he produced one from his pocket. Fiona braced the paper against her knee and signed her name carefully, then handed both back to Gideon. He glanced at her signature and tucked the contract back into his pocket. "Welcome to the Vance Ranch, Miss Vaughn." "Fiona," she said impulsively. "You can call me Fiona." "Fiona," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made her stomach flutter strangely. "And you can call me Gideon. No need for formality." They fell back into companionable silence, but this time it felt less awkward. Fiona found herself relaxing incrementally, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The enormity of what had happened was beginning to sink in. This morning she had been bound for 3 years of servitude to whoever would pay. Now she had a job, clothes, her freedom, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Can I ask you something?" Fiona said after a while. "You can ask. Cannot promise I will answer." "You said you know what it is like to have no choices. What did you mean?" Gideon was quiet for so long Fiona thought he would not answer. His jaw tightened slightly and his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "I was at Andersonville," he said finally, his voice flat. "The prison camp. Spent 9 months there during the war after my unit was captured. You want to know what it is like to have no choices, no freedom, to be treated like you are less than human. That is a good place to start. Lot of good men died there. I survived, though some days I am not sure why." Fiona felt her throat constrict. She had heard stories about Andersonville, about the horrific conditions, the starvation, the disease. The fact that Gideon had survived it explained the shadows in his eyes, the scars on his body, the way he had looked at her on that auction block with such grim understanding. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been hell." "It was. But I got out, came west, built something better." "That is the point of surviving, I suppose, to build something better." He glanced at her. "You will build something better too. You have got the chance now. Thanks to you. Thanks to yourself for having the courage to tear up that contract. I just provided the opportunity." The landscape began to change as they traveled, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Cattle grazed in the distance, their reddish-brown coats bright against the green grass. Fiona spotted a creek winding through the valley, its water catching the sunlight. "That is where the ranch starts," Gideon said, pointing to a fence line. "We will be at the house in another 30 minutes. The Vance Ranch revealed itself gradually as they crested a hill. The main house was single-story with a wide porch wrapped around it, built from weathered timber that had been well maintained. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a chicken coop. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and Fiona could see people moving about, tending to various tasks. As they approached, a few of the ranch hands looked up with curiosity. Gideon pulled the wagon to a stop near the main house and jumped down, then came around to help Fiona. His hands were strong and sure as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close enough that Fiona could see the darker ring around his gray irises. "Come on," he said, releasing her and stepping back. "I will introduce you to Mrs. Chen and show you where you will be staying." Fiona followed Gideon into the house, her heart pounding with nervousness. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a stone fireplace, and doorways leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and well organized, though it had the slightly spare look of a place inhabited mainly by men. A small, elderly Chinese woman stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She turned as they entered, her weathered face breaking into a smile when she saw Gideon. "Mr. Gideon, you are back earlier than I thought," she said in accented English. "Finished my business in town quicker than expected. Mrs. Chen, this is Fiona Vaughn. She will be working here at the ranch, helping you with cooking and whatever else needs doing. Fiona, this is Mrs. Chen. She has been with the ranch since the beginning and knows everything about running this place. Mrs. Chen studied Fiona with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. Then she smiled and nodded. Good. I can use the help. My knees are not what they used to be, and these cowboys eat like locusts. You can cook, girl? Yes, madam, Fiona replied. I am a decent cook. I can also garden, preserve food so clean, whatever you need. She speaks proper English and has manners. You did well, Mr. Gideon, Mrs. Chen turned back to her pot. Show her the spare room near mine. She can settle in, then come help me with supper. We are feeding 15 tonight. Gideon led Fiona down a short hallway to a small room that held a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the prairie. It was simple but clean, with a quilt on the bed and curtains on the window. To Fiona, who had been sleeping in a shared attic room with 2 other servants before the auction, it looked like luxury. This is yours, Gideon said. Mrs. Chen's room is next door if you need anything. The washroom is at the end of the hall. My room is on the other side of the house. Meals are at dawn, noon, and dusk. Sundays are half days with just basic chores. Any questions? Fiona shook her head, overwhelmed by how much her circumstances had changed in just a few hours. No, thank you for everything. Gideon tipped his hat to her. Just treating you like a human being, Fiona. You do not need to thank me for that. Get settled and help Mrs. Chen when you are ready. I will be in the barn if you need me. After he left, Fiona sat on the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. The mattress was comfortable, the room quiet except for the sounds drifting in through the window of ranch life continuing outside. She allowed herself one moment of tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being safe, of having some measure of control over her life again. Then she wiped her eyes, splashed water on her face from the basin, and went to find Mrs. Chen. She had a job to do, wages to earn, and a future to build. The elderly woman put Fiona to work immediately, showing her where ingredients were stored, explaining how much food to prepare for the hungry ranch hands, and demonstrating her preferred methods for various tasks. Fiona absorbed it all, grateful for the distraction and the clear expectations. She helped prepare a supper of beef stew, biscuits, and dried apple pie, and when the hands began filing into the dining hall attached to the bunkhouse, Mrs. Chen sent her with the food. The ranch hands were a mixed group, ranging from young cowboys barely past boyhood to grizzled older men. They were polite to Fiona, tipping their hats and thanking her for the meal, but clearly curious about her presence. She heard whispers and speculation but ignored them, focusing on serving the food and returning to the main house. Gideon took his meal separately in the main house, sitting at the kitchen table while Mrs. Chen and Fiona ate their own supper. He had washed up and changed into a clean shirt, though his hair was still damp from the creek. The hands are already placing bets on whether you will last a week, he said to Fiona, a hint of amusement in his voice. Most ranch women do not take to the isolation and hard work. Then they will lose their money, Fiona replied tartly. I have no intention of leaving, Mrs. Chen cackled with laughter. I like this one, Mr. Gideon. She has spine. After supper, Fiona helped clean up, learning where everything belonged in Mrs. Chen's well-organized kitchen. The elderly woman finally shooed her away as the sun began to set, telling her to get rest because mornings came early on a ranch. Fiona retreated to her small room, exhausted but unable to sleep immediately. She stood at the window and watched the last light fade from the sky, watched the stars emerge in their thousands, more stars than she had ever seen in Boston. The prairie stretched dark and vast before her, full of possibility and uncertainty. She thought about Gideon, about the contradiction of a man hardened by war and suffering, who still had enough compassion to free a stranger. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not with the predatory calculation of the other bidders but with recognition, as if he saw not a commodity but a person. It stirred something in her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Fiona climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, marveling at the simple comfort of clean sheets and a room of her own. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt hopeful. The days fell into a rhythm that Fiona found both exhausting and deeply satisfying. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the hands, spent her mornings tending the vegetable garden and preserving the summer harvest, her afternoons cooking and mending, her evenings cleaning up after meals and preparing for the next day. The work was constant and physically demanding, but it was honest work that she did as a free woman earning fair wages, and that made all the difference. Mrs. Chen proved to be both a skilled teacher and a sharp-tongued companion who did not suffer foolishness, but had a dry sense of humor that often made Fiona laugh. The elderly woman had come west with her husband decades ago, working as a cook on various ranches after he died in a mining accident. She treated Fiona with a brusque kindness that reminded Fiona of her grandmother back in Boston. Gideon remained somewhat enigmatic. He was polite and respectful, checking in with Fiona regularly to ensure she had what she needed and that no one was giving her trouble. But he kept a certain distance, as if he had drawn an invisible line he would not cross. Fiona found herself watching for him more than she cared to admit, noting the way he moved with confidence across the ranch, the way his hands gentled when he worked with the horses, the rare smiles that transformed his usually serious face. She learned things about him through observation and through Mrs. Chen's occasional comments. He was a fair boss but demanding, expecting hard work, but never asking more than he himself would give. He was respected by his men, though they clearly found him somewhat remote. He spent long hours working the ranch, often returning to the house well after dark with exhaustion written in every line of his body. And sometimes, late at night, Fiona would wake to hear him pacing on the porch, unable to sleep, haunted by whatever demons the war had left him. 3 weeks after Fiona's arrival, a summer storm rolled across the prairie. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the sky turned the color of a bruise. Gideon sent the hands to secure the livestock and batten down anything that could blow away. Fiona helped Mrs. Chen shutter the windows and move supplies away from potential leaks. The storm hit with fury, wind howling around the house and rain hammering the roof like bullets. Lightning cracked so close that Fiona could feel the thunder in her bones. Mrs. Chen, exhausted from the preparations, retired early to her room. Fiona remained in the main room, too keyed up by the storm's violence to sleep. Gideon came in from a final check of the property, soaked to the skin despite his rain slicker. His hat dripped water onto the floor and his boots squelched with every step. "Everything secure?" Fiona asked, rising from the chair by the fireplace where she had been pretending to read. "As secure as it can be. Going to be a long night." He pulled off his hat and set it on a peg, then shrugged out of the slicker. His shirt clung to his body, outlining the muscles beneath. "You should get some sleep. Storm will probably rage for hours. I do not think I could sleep through this even if I tried." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room in stark white light, and Fiona flinched despite herself. Gideon studied her face. "Not fond of storms." I do not mind them usually, but I have never experienced one quite this violent. Prairie storms can be fierce. I have seen them flatten barns and send cattle running for miles. He moved toward the fireplace, standing close enough to the flames that steam began to rise from his wet clothes. Though I have to admit, there is something beautiful about them too. All that wild power, nothing holding it back. Fiona came to stand beside him, drawn by the fire's warmth and by something else she did not want to examine too closely. Were you frightened of storms as a child? Too stubborn to be frightened of much as a child, drove my mother to distraction. A shadow crossed his face. She died of fever when I was 16, my father a year later. No siblings. I enlisted as soon as I was old enough, figured I had nothing to lose. I am sorry. About your parents. Gideon shrugged, but the gesture was not as casual as he probably intended. Long time ago now. What about you? You have family back east, an aunt in Boston. We are not close. Fiona hesitated, then decided the storm and the late hour and the intimacy of the firelit room made confessions easier. She helped me secure the position with Mrs. Morrison mainly to get me out of her house. She made it clear I was a burden after my parents died when I was 19. I thought coming west would be an adventure, a chance to build my own life. Instead, I found myself trapped in a different kind of cage until you freed me. You freed yourself, Gideon said, turning to look at her. I just bought a piece of paper. You are the one who tore it up and chose to stay to work to build something new. That takes courage. They stood facing each other in the firelight, and Fiona's breath caught in her throat. Gideon's eyes were dark in the shadows, intense as they searched her face. She could feel the heat radiating from him, from the fire, from the charged air between them. Time seemed to slow, and she found herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by a force she could not name. Gideon took a step back, breaking the moment. You should get some rest. Morning comes whether we are ready or not. Fiona felt the loss of his proximity like a physical ache. Right? Yes. Good night, Gideon. Good night, Fiona. She fled to her room, her heart pounding. She pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks and tried to calm her racing thoughts. What had just happened? Had she imagined the heat in Gideon's eyes, the way his gaze had dropped briefly to her lips? Or had it been real, that pull between them, that moment of possibility? And more importantly, what was she going to do about the fact that she was developing feelings for her employer, for the man who had saved her from servitude? It was dangerous territory, complicated by power dynamics and gratitude and the newness of her situation. She needed this job, this security. She could not risk it by throwing herself at Gideon like some love-struck fool. But as she lay in bed listening to the storm rage outside, Fiona could not stop thinking about the way Gideon had looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he said her name, the careful distance he maintained, as if he too was fighting an attraction. Maybe she was not alone in this. Maybe he felt it too. The thought should have troubled her. Instead, it filled her with a giddy sort of hope that had nothing to do with jobs or security, and everything to do with the way her heart skipped when Gideon smiled. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Fiona threw herself into her work with renewed determination, trying to push thoughts of Gideon from her mind. But it was impossible when they lived in the same house, took their meals together, crossed paths a dozen times a day. She noticed small things. The way Gideon always served himself last at meals, making sure everyone else had enough first. The way he crouched down to speak to Mrs. Chen at eye level rather than towering over her. The way he checked Fiona's hands one day after she mentioned a blister, his touch gentle as he examined the irritated skin, his frown concerned as he told her to use gloves when working in the garden. The way he seemed to find excuses to be wherever she was, helping with tasks he had never bothered with before, their fingers brushing as they worked side by side. Mrs. Chen noticed too, if her knowing looks were any indication. But the elderly woman said nothing, just hummed to herself with what sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. A month into Fiona's employment, Gideon asked if she would like to learn to ride properly. Fiona agreed eagerly, tired of being limited to the house and immediate grounds. She met him at the corral after breakfast, where he had saddled a gentle mare named Daisy. "She is the calmest horse on the ranch," Gideon explained, stroking the mare's nose. "Perfect for learning. Now, first thing you need to know is how to approach a horse." He spent the next hour teaching Fiona the basics, his patience endless as he demonstrated mounting, proper posture, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse through pressure and release. He stood close to adjust her grip, his hands covering hers, his breath warm against her ear as he spoke. Fiona's concentration wavered dangerously, but she forced herself to focus on his words rather than his proximity. "You are a natural," Gideon said after she completed several circuits of the corral. "Another few lessons and you will be ready to ride out on the ranch." "I had a good teacher," Fiona replied, smiling down at him. Gideon returned her smile, and the moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then one of the hands called for Gideon, breaking the spell. He stepped back and tipped his hat to Fiona. "Same time tomorrow if you want to continue." "I do." The riding lessons became a daily occurrence, the hour each morning that Fiona looked forward to most. Gideon was different during those lessons, more relaxed and open, quick to laugh when Fiona made a mistake or the mare decided to be stubborn. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories about their pasts, their hopes for the future, their opinions on topics ranging from the best way to break in new boots to whether cats or dogs made better companions. Fiona learned that Gideon loved to read, that he had taught himself carpentry during the long winters, that he wanted to expand the ranch eventually, to include breeding horses as well as cattle. Gideon learned that Fiona had once dreamed of being a teacher, that she missed the ocean even though Boston had never truly felt like home, that she had a weakness for peppermint candy and adventure novels. They became friends, though the attraction simmering beneath the surface colored every interaction. Fiona caught Gideon watching her sometimes with an expression that made her pulse race. She knew she looked at him the same way, with a longing she was not quite ready to act on but could no longer deny. Mrs. Chen took Fiona aside one afternoon in late September, when the heat was finally breaking and the air carried the first hints of autumn. "That boy is in love with you," she said bluntly. "And you are in love with him, though you both dance around it like scared rabbits." Fiona felt her cheeks heat. "Mrs. Chen, I do not think. Do not think, just feel. Life is too short and too hard to waste time on thinking when your heart already knows the answer." The elderly woman squeezed Fiona's hand with surprising strength. "Mr. Gideon, he is a good man. The war hurt him, and he has been alone too long. You brought light back into this house. Do not be afraid of that. What if it complicates things? He is my employer. He is a man who loves you and treats you with respect. That is what matters. The rest you can figure out together." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Young people make everything so complicated. In my day, you liked someone, you told them, you got married, you built a life. Simple." "Not everyone had it that simple," Fiona pointed out. "No, but that does not mean you cannot." Mrs. Chen returned to her cooking, clearly considering the conversation over. Fiona mulled over the words as she went about her afternoon chores. Was it really as simple as Mrs. Chen suggested? Could she trust what she felt, trust what she thought she saw in Gideon's eyes? And more terrifyingly, Did she have the courage to find out? The answer came during a trip to Fort Worth in early October. Gideon needed supplies and asked if Fiona wanted to accompany him, since she had not left the ranch since arriving. Fiona agreed immediately, eager to see something beyond the ranch boundaries and secretly thrilled at the prospect of spending the day alone with Gideon. They set out at dawn in the wagon, the morning cool enough that Fiona was grateful for the shawl Mrs. Chen had insisted she bring. The prairie was painted in golds and browns, the grass waving in the breeze like a living thing. Gideon seemed relaxed and content, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. "I have been thinking," he said about halfway to town. "You have been with us for 3 months now. You have earned your wages and then some. If you wanted to move on, try something different, I would understand. I would help you however I could." Fiona turned to stare at him, her stomach dropping. "Do you want me to leave?" "What? No." Gideon looked startled, then frustrated with himself. "No, that is not what I meant at all. I just wanted you to know you are not trapped at the ranch. You have choices. I do not want you to feel obligated to stay just because I bought that contract." "I stay because I want to," Fiona said firmly, "because I am happy there. Because I have purpose and friends and a home, not because of any sense of obligation." "Good, that is good." Gideon cleared his throat. "I am glad. We would miss you if you left. I would miss you." The confession hung in the air between them. Fiona felt her heart begin to race. "I would miss you too. Very much." Gideon's hands tightened on the reins. "Fiona, I need to tell you something, but I do not want to make you uncomfortable or put you in an awkward position." "Then maybe you should tell me anyway and let me decide if it is awkward." He huffed a small laugh but did not smile. "Fair enough. The truth is, I have developed feelings for you, strong feelings. It started the day I saw you on that auction block, looking so fierce and brave despite everything. And then I got to know you, your sharp mind and kind heart and stubborn determination, and I fell even harder. I know I should not say anything. I know it puts you in a difficult spot since you work for me. But I could not keep pretending I only saw you as an employee when the truth is I think about you all the time. When I wake up, when I am working, when I am trying to sleep. You are in every thought, and I am tired of hiding it." Fiona's breath caught. For a long moment she could not speak, could only stare at Gideon's profile as he kept his eyes firmly on the trail ahead, his jaw tight with tension. Then she reached over and placed her hand over his. "I have feelings for you too," she said softly. "I was afraid to admit it, afraid of ruining what we have, afraid it was just gratitude or proximity or something that was not real. But it is real. The way I feel when you smile at me when we are together, when you look at me like I am something precious. That is real, and it has been growing stronger every day." Gideon turned to her then, his gray eyes blazing with emotion. "You mean that?" "Every word." He pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the trail, set the brake, and turned to face her fully. "Fiona Vaughn, would it be all right if I kissed you?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, it would be very all right." Gideon cupped her face in his calloused hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Fiona had never been more certain of anything. She closed her eyes as his lips met hers in a kiss that was tender and searching, and full of all the longing they had both been suppressing. The world narrowed to just them, just this moment, the taste of him and the warmth of his hands and the way he kissed her like she was everything he had ever wanted. When they finally broke apart, Fiona was breathless and dizzy and happier than she could remember being in years. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Gideon admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "You should have done it weeks ago," Fiona replied, making him laugh. "I will make up for lost time, I promise." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Fiona wound her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. They made it to Fort Worth eventually, though they stopped several more times along the way to kiss and talk and marvel at this new understanding between them. In town, Gideon took Fiona's hand openly as they walked, and she felt like she was floating. They completed their errands quickly, both eager to return to the ranch and this new reality they had created. "So, what happens now?" Fiona asked on the return journey, tucked against Gideon's side with his arm around her shoulders. "How do we navigate this?" "Carefully and honestly," Gideon replied. "I do not want anything about our relationship to make you feel pressured or obligated. You still have your job for as long as you want it, regardless of what happens between us personally. And if you ever want to stop working at the ranch, I will help you find something else. I will not be the reason you feel trapped ever again." "I do not feel trapped. I feel free. Freer than I have ever felt, because I am choosing you with full knowledge and consent." Fiona tilted her head up to look at him. "I love you, Gideon. I am almost certain of it, and I will be completely certain soon." Gideon's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "I love you too. No almost about it. I am completely certain." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink and purple. Mrs. Chen took one look at their joined hands and their glowing faces, and simply nodded with satisfaction, as if she had predicted this outcome all along. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness that Fiona had never imagined possible. She and Gideon courted properly, taking long rides across the ranch, sitting together by the fire in the evenings while Mrs. Chen pretended not to watch them with approval, stealing kisses in the barn or the garden, or anywhere they could find a moment alone. The ranch hands quickly figured out what was happening and seemed universally pleased, though they enjoyed teasing Gideon mercilessly about being smitten. Fiona continued her work with enthusiasm, but now it felt different knowing she was building a life not just for herself but with Gideon. They talked about the future, about expanding the ranch, about what kind of home they wanted to create together. Gideon spoke of his plans to breed horses, and Fiona suggested hosting travelers for pay, using her skills to create a comfortable way station for people passing through the area. In December, as the first snow began to fall, Gideon asked Fiona to go riding with him. He led her to a spot on the ranch she had not visited before, a small hilltop overlooking a valley where a creek meandered through stands of oak and cottonwood. The view was breathtaking, the snow-dusted landscape stretching to the horizon. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Gideon said, helping Fiona down from her horse. "I come here when I need to think or when I want to remember why I chose this life." "It is beautiful," Fiona agreed. "I can see why you love it. I was thinking this would be a good spot to build a bigger house someday, when the ranch grows and we need more space." He turned to her, suddenly nervous in a way she rarely saw. "That is, if you would want to build that house with me, as my wife." Fiona's heart leaped into her throat. "Gideon Vance, are you asking me to marry you?" "I am." He pulled a small box from his coat pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's. I know it is not fancy, but I thought maybe you would not mind." "Fiona, you have brought joy and light into my life when I thought I was done with those things. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Fiona's face, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes." Gideon slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her while the snow fell softly around them, and Fiona thought her heart might burst from happiness. 6 months ago, she had been standing on an auction block with no hope and no future. Now she had everything, and it had started with a cowboy who saw her as a person worth saving and ended with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. They married in February of 1879, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands as witnesses. The local minister came out to officiate, and Fiona wore a dress she and Mrs. Chen had sewn together, ivory muslin trimmed with lace. Gideon wore his best suit and looked at Fiona throughout the ceremony like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Mrs. Chen cried, though she denied it later. The ranch hands threw a party in the bunkhouse that lasted until dawn, with fiddle music and dancing and enough food and drink to feed twice their number. Gideon and Fiona snuck away eventually to the main house, to the room they would now share, and spent their wedding night learning each other in ways that made Fiona understand why poets wrote such tortured verses about love and longing. Married life suited them both. Fiona had worried initially about potential awkwardness or adjustment periods, but living and working together proved to be as natural as breathing. They were partners in every sense, making decisions about the ranch together, supporting each other through difficult days, celebrating victories large and small. The ranch prospered. Gideon began his horse breeding program, and Fiona started taking in travelers as she had suggested, creating a small but steady additional income. They built a new room onto the house for guests and talked about eventually building that bigger house on the hilltop, though they were in no rush. The house they had was filled with love and laughter, and that made it more than adequate. Mrs. Chen continued to run the kitchen with Fiona's help, though the elderly woman began to slow down as arthritis plagued her joints. Fiona took over more of the work, and she and Gideon quietly agreed Mrs. Chen would always have a home with them for as long as she lived. The old woman had become family, and they took care of their own. In the spring of 1880, Fiona realized she was pregnant. She told Gideon one evening after supper, and he picked her up and spun her around with such joy that she had to remind him to be careful with her. He spent the next months treating her like she was made of spun glass, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Their son was born in November during an early snowstorm, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Thomas, after Gideon's father, and watching Gideon hold their tiny son with tears streaming down his face was one of the most beautiful moments of Fiona's life. Thomas was followed by a daughter they named Rose 2 years later, and another son named James 3 years after that. The house grew crowded and chaotic in the best possible way, filled with the noise and energy of children. Gideon proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching his children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, reading to them every night, showing them how to be kind and strong and honest. Fiona loved watching her children grow up wild and free on the ranch, loved the life they had built together. She sometimes thought about the woman she had been on that auction block, terrified and hopeless, and marveled at how far she had come. She had been given a chance at freedom and had seized it with both hands, building something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. Mrs. Chen passed peacefully in her sleep in 1885, and they buried her on the hilltop overlooking the valley. Gideon carved her headstone himself, and they planted a flowering tree beside her grave. Fiona mourned the loss of the woman who had become like a grandmother to her, who had given her wisdom and support when she needed it most. By 1890, the Vance Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. They had expanded to 5,000 acres, built the new house on the hilltop as planned, and established a reputation for producing excellent horses and cattle. Thomas, now 9, was already a skilled rider who followed his father everywhere. Rose, at 7, had inherited Fiona's love of books and her father's stubborn determination. James, at 4, was a whirlwind of energy who kept everyone on their toes. On a warm evening in June, Fiona and Gideon sat on the porch of their hilltop house, watching the sun set over the ranch while their children played in the yard below. Gideon had his arm around Fiona's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the easy comfort of 12 years together. "Do you ever think about that day in Fort Worth?" Gideon asked. "When I bought your contract?" "Sometimes," Fiona admitted. "Usually when I am counting my blessings, which is often. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. Something about the way you held yourself, the fire in your eyes even when you were frightened. I could not walk away and leave you to whatever fate awaited." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best $500 I ever spent. You gave me back my life," Fiona said softly. "You gave me everything. We gave each other everything. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me want to live again, to build something lasting, to open my heart." He turned her face toward his. "I love you, Fiona Vance. More every day, which I would not have thought possible." "I love you too," Fiona whispered. "Forever." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, their children's laughter rising from the yard, the ranch spreading out around them like a promise kept. Fiona thought about the woman she had been, frightened and alone, and the woman she had become, strong and loved and free. She thought about choice, about courage, about the unexpected ways life could change in a single moment. And she thought about Gideon, the man who had handed her that contract and told her she was free to choose, never imagining she would choose him, choose this life, choose every day to love him with her whole heart. The years continued to roll forward as they always did, marked by seasons and celebrations, challenges overcome and victories won. The children grew tall and strong. Thomas went off to college in 1896, much to everyone's amazement, returning summers to help with the ranch and full of ideas about modern farming techniques. Rose discovered a talent for training horses that rivaled her father's, and by age 15 was sought after across Texas for her skill. James, the baby who stayed the baby even as he grew, developed his mother's head for numbers and began managing the ranch's finances with impressive aptitude. Gideon grayed at the temples but remained strong and vital, still rising before dawn to work the land he loved. Fiona found herself more beautiful in middle age than she had been as a young woman, her face marked by smile lines and sun exposure, her body softer after 3 children but still capable and strong. They were happy in the deep, abiding way of couples who have weathered storms together and emerged even more committed to each other. In 1898, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from 3 counties. The house they had built was filled with friends and neighbors, with ranch hands past and present, with business associates who had become friends. Thomas gave a toast that made Fiona cry. Rose played fiddle while James sang, and Gideon swept Fiona into a waltz in the middle of the living room, spinning her until she was dizzy and laughing. Later, after everyone had left and the house was quiet except for the familiar sounds of home, Gideon took Fiona back to the hilltop where he had proposed. They stood together, looking at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to partners in every sense. "No regrets?" Gideon asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Fiona confirmed. Only that I did not buy that contract sooner." He pulled her close. "Though I suppose everything happened when it was meant to." It did. "We found each other at exactly the right moment when we both needed saving." Fiona turned in his arms to face him, and we have spent 20 years saving each other over and over again. Here is to 20 more, Gideon said, kissing her, and 20 after that. The turn of the century came with both excitement and trepidation. The modern world was encroaching on the West, bringing railroads and telegraphs and automobiles and change that felt both thrilling and unsettling. But the Vance Ranch remained a constant, a piece of the Old West preserved through hard work and adaptation. Thomas married in 1902, bringing home a lovely woman named Helen who had studied agriculture alongside him. They settled on the far end of the ranch in a house Gideon helped them build, starting their own herd and their own family. Fiona became a grandmother in 1903, weeping with joy when she held Thomas's daughter, named Fiona in her honor. Rose remained unmarried, declaring she loved horses more than any man she had met so far, though Fiona suspected a hand named Samuel might eventually change her mind based on the looks they exchanged. James surprised everyone by courting the daughter of a banker from Fort Worth, a sharp young woman who saw immediately the potential in combining their family's interests. By 1905, the original ranch house had been converted into a way station and boarding house that Fiona ran with the help of several younger women she had trained. The Hilltop House remained the family home, now hosting regular Sunday dinners that could include upwards of 20 people between children and grandchildren and extended ranch family. Gideon's hair had gone fully silver, but he remained as handsome to Fiona as the day she first saw him interrupt that auction. His hands were gnarled from decades of hard work, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her, and he still reached for her hand whenever they walked together. Fiona's auburn hair was streaked with white, and she wore spectacles for reading now, but she felt more herself than she ever had. The frightened girl from Boston was long gone, replaced by a woman who had built a life and a legacy through courage and love and sheer determination. On a spring evening in 1908, 30 years after that fateful day in Fort Worth, Fiona found Gideon in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. She brought him coffee and stood beside him, both of them watching the expectant mother with the practiced ease of people who had witnessed this miracle countless times. 30 years, Fiona said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both are true, Gideon replied, accepting the coffee with a smile of thanks. I remember every detail of the day I met you, how you looked, how you held yourself, the exact tone of your voice when you asked why I was helping you. But I also cannot imagine a version of my life where you are not in it. It is like you have always been here. I have a confession, Fiona said. Sometimes I still have nightmares that I am back on that auction block, that you never came, that I ended up in service to someone cruel. I wake up terrified, and then I see you beside me, and I remember that I am safe, that I am loved, that this life is real. Gideon set down the coffee and pulled her into his arms. This is real. I am real. Our life together, our children, this ranch, all of it is real and solid and yours. Nothing can take it away. I know. But I also know how easily it could have gone differently. If you had not been in Fort Worth that day, if you had not had the money, if you had not cared enough to do something, my entire life would have been unrecognizable. But I was there, and I did care, and you had the courage to tear up that contract and choose freedom. We both played our parts in creating this life. He kissed her forehead. And I would do it again. I would buy 1,000 contracts, spend every penny I had if it meant finding you. The mare shifted, showing signs that the foaling was imminent. Gideon and Fiona stayed with her through the night, helping as needed, witnessing new life entering the world as they had so many times before. There was something profound about it, Fiona thought, this cycle of birth and growth and continuation. They were part of something bigger than themselves, something that would outlast them. The foal was born healthy just before dawn, struggling to its feet on wobbly legs while its mother cleaned it tenderly. Gideon and Fiona stood arm in arm, exhausted but satisfied, watching the beginning of a new story. "Thank you," Fiona said suddenly. Gideon looked at her quizzically. "For what?" "For seeing me as a person when others saw property, for giving me the choice to be free, for loving me, for building this life with me, for 30 years of happiness I never thought I would have." Tears slid down her cheeks. "For everything. Oh, my love." Gideon wiped her tears away gently. "Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life, for making every day an adventure. Thank you for our children and this ranch and every moment we have shared. Thank you for loving me even when I was difficult or distant or haunted by the past. Thank you for being my partner, my best friend, my home." They kissed in the soft light of dawn, in the barn that smelled of hay and horses and honest work, and Fiona felt the same flutter in her stomach she had felt the first time Gideon kissed her all those years ago. Some things never changed. The love between them remained constant and true, a foundation they had built their entire lives upon. The years marched on, as relentless as the seasons. More grandchildren were born, filling the ranch with noise and energy. Rose finally married Samuel in 1910, admitting she had been in love with him for years, but enjoyed making him work for it. James and his wife produced twin sons who terrorized everyone with their matching mischief. Thomas and Helen welcomed 3 more children, and little Fiona gained siblings to play with during family gatherings. The ranch evolved with the times, incorporating new technologies and methods while maintaining the core values Gideon and Fiona had established. They were known throughout Texas, not just for their excellent livestock, but for their fair treatment of workers, their generosity to neighbors in need, and the love that permeated every aspect of their lives. In 1915, Gideon had a health scare that terrified everyone. He collapsed while working in the fields, and the doctor diagnosed exhaustion and a weakened heart. He was ordered to rest, to reduce his workload, to let others handle the heavy labor. Gideon chafed under the restrictions, but Fiona was firm, enlisting their children to help enforce the doctor's orders. "I am not an invalid," Gideon grumbled from the porch chair where Fiona had installed him with a blanket and a book. "No, you are a stubborn old cowboy who does not know when to slow down," Fiona replied tartly. "But you are my stubborn old cowboy, and I intend to keep you around as long as possible. So you will rest, and you will let Thomas and James handle the ranch for a while, and you will stop complaining about it. When did you get so bossy? I have always been bossy. You just found it charming before." She sat beside him and took his hand. "I am frightened, Gideon. We have had 37 years together, and it is not nearly enough. I need more time with you. So please, please take care of yourself." Gideon's expression softened. "I am sorry for scaring you. You are right, as usual. I will rest. I will let the boys handle things. And I will do everything I can to give us more years together, because you are right. 37 years is not nearly enough." He recovered slowly, never quite returning to his former strength, but stabilizing under Fiona's careful supervision. They adjusted to a new rhythm of life, one with more sitting and talking and watching rather than constant action. Gideon claimed to hate it at first, but Fiona suspected he secretly enjoyed having an excuse to spend more time with her, to sit on the porch and watch their grandchildren play, to read the books he had never had time for before. In 1918, they celebrated their 40th anniversary with a quieter gathering than their 20th had been, just immediate family and closest friends. The world was embroiled in a terrible war overseas, and the mood was more subdued than it might have been otherwise. But there was still joy in the gathering, still love and laughter and the sense of a family bound by deep ties. Fiona looked around the table at dinner and felt overwhelming gratitude. 3 children, all happy and healthy and successful in their own rights. 8 grandchildren and counting, each one a miracle. A ranch that had prospered for 4 decades. And Gideon, still beside her after all these years, his hand finding hers under the table the way it always did. "Speech," Thomas called out, and others took up the cry. Gideon stood slowly, steady on his feet but noticeably older than he had been even a year ago. He cleared his throat and looked at the assembled family. 40 years ago, I married the love of my life in this house. Well, the house that stood where this one does. She was the bravest person I had ever met, and she still is. She took a chance on a broken-down cowboy with more scars than sense, and she made me better. She made everything better. He turned to Fiona, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Fiona Vance, you are my heart, my home, my everything. Every good thing in my life traces back to you. These children we made, this ranch we built, this family gathered here, all of it exists because you had the courage to tear up that contract and choose freedom. Thank you for choosing me too. Thank you for 40 years of love and partnership and joy. I love you more than words can say." There was not a dry eye in the room. Fiona stood and embraced Gideon, not caring that everyone was watching, not caring about anything except this man who had saved her and loved her and built a beautiful life with her. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, "forever and always." The years became more precious as they advanced in age. Gideon's health remained fragile, and Fiona herself began to slow down, arthritis making her hands stiff and painful. But they were together, and that was what mattered. They had long conversations about everything and nothing, reminisced about the early days, made plans for the future they might not see but their children and grandchildren would. In the spring of 1920, on a day when the prairie was painted in wildflowers and the sky was impossibly blue, Gideon asked Fiona to ride out with him one more time. She protested that he was not strong enough, but he insisted, and their children reluctantly agreed to help him saddle 2 horses. They rode slowly to the hilltop where their house stood, where Gideon had proposed all those years ago. He had to rest several times, and Fiona stayed close beside him, worried but understanding his need to do this. When they finally reached the spot, Gideon dismounted carefully and helped Fiona down. "This is where it started," he said, looking out over the valley. "Where I asked you to marry me, where we dreamed about the future. I wanted to come back here one more time to see it with you, to remember." "It is as beautiful as ever," Fiona said, though she could barely see it through her tears. She knew what he was doing, knew this was a goodbye of sorts, and her heart was breaking. "I want you to know something," Gideon said, taking her hands. "I am not afraid. I have lived a full, rich, happy life beyond anything I imagined possible. I have known real love, raised good children, built something lasting. Because of you, it has all been because of you." "Do not talk like that," Fiona begged. "We still have time." "Maybe, I hope so. But if we do not, I need you to know that I died a happy man. And I need you to promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy, keep being the brave, fierce, beautiful woman you have always been. Do not mourn too long, live." "I cannot promise that. You are asking too much." "I am asking you to do what you have always done. To choose life, to choose hope, to choose to keep going even when it is hard. You did it once when you tore up that contract. You can do it again." He kissed her softly. "Promise me, Fiona." "I promise," she whispered, knowing it was what he needed to hear even if she could not imagine life without him. They sat together on the hilltop, until the sun began to set, holding each other, saying nothing because everything had already been said. Then they rode slowly back to the house, and Fiona helped Gideon to bed, curling up beside him as she had every night for 42 years. Gideon passed peacefully in his sleep 2 nights later, Fiona beside him holding his hand. He simply did not wake up, slipping away so quietly that she did not realize he was gone until she felt how still and cool his hand had become. She held him and wept, her heart shattering into pieces she was not sure could be mended. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the life Gideon had lived and the respect he had earned. He was buried on the hilltop beside Mrs. Chen, overlooking the ranch he had built and loved. Fiona stood at the graveside supported by her children, staring at the fresh earth, unable to fully comprehend that he was really gone. The months that followed were the darkest of Fiona's life. She went through the motions of living, ate when her children made her, slept fitfully, worked in the garden because her body did not know what else to do. But inside she felt hollow, like some essential part of her had been buried with Gideon. She was 64 years old, and she had to figure out how to exist without her other half. It was her grandchildren who ultimately pulled her back. Little Fiona, now 17 and so much like her namesake, came to stay with her and simply refused to let her grandmother wallow. She badgered Fiona into teaching her to bake bread, insisted on evening walks, read aloud from books when Fiona's eyes were too tired. The other grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with life and noise and demands for attention that forced Fiona to engage with the world again. Slowly, painfully, Fiona began to heal. The sharp edge of grief dulled into something more manageable, a constant ache rather than an acute agony. She found she could think about Gideon and smile instead of only crying. She could remember their life together with gratitude instead of only loss. She kept the promise she had made him. She kept living, finding small joys in her garden, in her grandchildren, in the ranch that continued to prosper under her children's management. She took over the full operation of the boarding house again, finding purpose in providing hospitality to travelers and hearing their stories. On what would have been their 43rd anniversary, Fiona rode out to the hilltop alone. She was slower now, her body protesting the exertion, but she needed to do this. She needed to sit in the spot where Gideon had proposed, where they had said their final goodbye, and talk to him one more time. "I am keeping my promise," she said to the air, to the grass, to wherever Gideon's spirit might be. "I am living. Some days are harder than others, but I am doing it. The children are well. The grandchildren are growing up so fast. The ranch is thriving. Everything we built together is continuing, and it is beautiful." She wiped away tears. "I miss you. Every single day I miss you, but I am grateful too for every moment we had, for the life we built, for the love that has carried me through even this grief. You gave me 42 years of happiness, and that is more than most people get. So thank you, my love. Thank you for everything." A breeze kicked up, warm and gentle, rustling the grass and carrying the scent of wildflowers. Fiona closed her eyes and let herself imagine it was Gideon's touch. One last caress, one last assurance that he was at peace and that she would be too. She lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1928 at the age of 72. Her children found her in the morning, looking peaceful, a slight smile on her face, and they knew she had finally gone to be with Gideon again. They buried her beside him on the hilltop, just as she had requested. The headstone they erected was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription that Thomas had chosen. They gave each other freedom and found love. The Vance Ranch continued through the generations, passed down from parent to child, growing and adapting but always maintaining the core values Gideon and Fiona had established. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder of the power of compassion, the importance of freedom, and the transformative nature of love. On the hilltop where they were buried, the flowering tree they had planted for Mrs. Chen grew large and strong, joined eventually by two more trees planted in Gideon and Fiona's memory. In the spring, they bloomed in glorious profusion, covering the graves in petals like pink snow, a living testament to lives well lived and love that transcended even death. And if sometimes on quiet evenings, ranch hands reported seeing two figures walking hand in hand across the hilltop at sunset, no one thought it strange. After all, love like that did not just disappear. It left echoes, imprints on the land and in the hearts of those who came after. Gideon and Fiona Vance had built something that lasted, a legacy not just of land and cattle and success, but of kindness and courage and choosing love, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. Their story began with an auction block and a torn contract, with a cowboy who saw a woman in chains and decided to do something about it. It continued through 42 years of marriage, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and countless moments of joy and hardship shared side by side. And it ended, as all good love stories do, with 2 souls reunited, together forever in the land they had loved and the family they had created, their legacy living on in every person who heard their story and believed that love, real and true and freely chosen, could overcome anything.